Folks. I think the only item we have on the agenda is the collection, MCP collection stuff. You guys want to get started?
Yeah, sure. The context on that issue is that we have an MCP server that we've written that sends config to pilot, and we're only configuring a few types, like virtual services, destination roles, service entries, and like two more maybe. And as of us upgrading to Istio 113, we have to send an empty resource for every single config type. And so we wanted to talk about, is there a way that we can make pilot request either specific config types? Basically have some way for pilot to not just sit and wait for a first push of every single config type. And so we had kind of two ideas around that. One was to kind of more short-term thinking, but like to start up the pilot discovery binary with some kind of configuration that allows you to say, okay, when pilot starts up, it only needs to accept these 5 types of config or all the config. The default would be like all the config, and maybe it could have a configuration to accept just some of the types. And then potentially longer term, we wanted to bring up and consider this idea of in MCP itself, part of like the client and the server talking to each other at the beginning, there would be some kind of discoverability function where like the client maybe asks the server, what kinds of config types do you configure? And then only expect those after that point.
Okay. So I need to go back and check one thing, but I think we can have a third option. And I'm not 100% sure whether this is going to be feasible or not, but we should definitely consider this. And that would be when pilot requests a collection that doesn't exist, MCP can automatically say no, right? The stack itself can say no, right? This kind of, I think, alleviates some of the concerns that, for example, Costin has. I understand where Costin is coming from. He doesn't want to create this so many knobs and levers in the system and cause many more things to possibly go wrong, right? So we want to have a very robust system, right? That's his goal, and I kind of agree with the goal, right? But I also am not happy with the idea of sending yes to every request. Hey, I want food. Yes, it's an empty set. Here you go. Right. So I think at the limit, we want to have the discovery server so that somebody can actually if MCP goes more advanced and we have more use cases, somebody can do meta programming with services, right? You can look at the discovery and then decide on things. But otherwise, pilot should be able to come up and say, here's the 20 things that I need, right, at these versions. And I'm going to go and ask for each one of them from the server, right? And the server can say, okay, here's the 15 things I know. And for these 5 things, I don't have them, right? So if you model it that way, I think things should still be robust. On the pilot side, you can make a point-wise decision saying that, okay, I will never get any resources for this thing. Okay, I will never get any resources for this collection from this service, and I can handle it appropriately on that side. Whatever it might be just saying not asking for that collection anymore, or maybe erroring out, maybe logging it. Does it make sense?
So that means on pilot side, pilot sends a request for all configuration. The server replies with just some of them, and pilot just logs instead of waiting for those other types and then continues on with just those?
Yes, that would be the idea. That would be the behavior where the server will indicate somehow that this collection doesn't exist, right? And then pilot doesn't stop and keep waiting for the collection. It will just be look, we make a decision at that point in pilot saying that, okay, we're just going to log this, or we're just going to send a telemetry so that it can be observed. But otherwise, pilot start up and treat that collection as empty internally, right? I kind of see that model as a good compromise because there's much less amount of knobs and levers. It kind of autocorrects. And I think it handles things like upgrade scenarios where, I have an older galley, pilot starts up, it's asking for new things, so these kinds, I think it might be useful for those kinds of things as well. So
I worry about that.
Go ahead.
I worry, so that sounds like error suppression to me. And I worry about that because it could hide mismatches in version numbers or like, bugs between the two of them, because it's like if pilot can warm up just fine with its configuration source responding to nothing, and it's like, oh, pilot's running fine, but the configuration source is saying, oh, none of these exist, I can provide no useful configuration, I would rather have an error in that scenario.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Now you can actually make that decision in pilot. In pilot, you can make now your configuration becomes, these are the things to ask for. It's not going to be these are the things to ask for. What to do when you figure out certain collections doesn't exist that you're asking for.
Say more on that.
Say again?
What is that? So what you just said sounds like what we were proposing, which is in a configuration source, we tell pilot which collection types to look for.
No, that's not what I'm saying, right? So like you can say, if you don't find any collections that you're looking for, exit.
How does it know which collections to look for?
It has already have an inherent set of collections that it is looking for already, right?
Okay.
So it will just keep looking for those. And then if you can actually now create infrastructure or make a policy decision within pilot in the case where it doesn't find one or more of these things. Your policy could be, if you cannot find any networking networking related connections, do not start up, but otherwise everything else should be fine, for example, right? So instead of like being closer to the metal and supplying these collections by hand, now it gives you a higher level policy mechanism on pilot to handle the case. Does that make sense?
So there would be some set of like required config. So there would be logic in pilot that says, okay, if these don't show up, there will be an error. But otherwise, it can start up just fine. Does that mean that the MCP server has to indicate some way to pilot that it's not going to send certain types of configuration?
Yeah, I kind of see that as like think of the HTTP server case, right? You connect and you request a resource and you get 200 and you get a resource or you get 404, right? It's kind of the same idea. You connect and you ask for something and it's not there, so you get a 404. Now you need to make a decision, right? You can tear down everything and say, oh, I'm giving up, or you come up with a mitigation model based on whatever you are trying to accomplish, right? And that becomes a policy decision now on your client code, right? So that's what I'm proposing, right? We actually have a policy decision in Python, and the policy can be, hey, the collection doesn't exist. Oh well, we are just gonna move on, right? Which aligns with the robustness expectation I believe that Costin has, right? Things can just start up. Or you can actually now add additional flags if you care about the scenario, saying that no, that's important. We want to be able to see when collections doesn't exist. If you find something that doesn't exist, exit, right?
Mm-hmm. So there's like two paths of logic. One where we say pilot when you start up, like please actually error if you don't get all of these configs, and then by default there's a couple of like required things that pilot needs to come up anyway. Make sure that those are there and error if not, but otherwise go ahead.
I don't want to design the behavior of pilots right now. All I am saying is, okay, that becomes an abstract bubble of policy decision. And now we can have a further discussion with the networking folks and everything about how do we handle this, right? But the default behavior would be like, for pilots, if you supply nothing else, starts up, asks for collections. One of the collections is not found, it will just keep functioning.
Interesting. There's like specific code that's written in Pilot to prevent it from like reporting as warmed up or like.
Yeah. So that needs to be changed.
Yeah. Okay. And so that was written. That code was introduced in this most recent version, and we're considering changing that because it didn't used to. Like, obviously, it didn't used to complain if it didn't get all collection sources. Like, it sounds like we're reverting back to previous behavior, and so I'm wondering if there was a conversation involved in like making Pilot refuse to configure any envoys until it's completely warmed up, or if that was just like something that got merged because it seemed like a good idea and now we're questioning it.
I think we are conflating two things. Okay. One of them is Pilot not serving things before it's warmed up. The second is the definition of what warm up is. Okay. So currently the definition of warm up is, look, we need to get resources or some ACK from the service for each collection, right? What I'm saying is it's still the case, but we now have a success or error case, right? And if the server doesn't know the collection, instead of like dropping the connection, this is what we do with MCP today, we will try to send a no, this collection doesn't exist response, right? And that is in place of, okay, here's an ACK, it's an empty set. We actually are saying, no, this collection doesn't exist, okay? So the first like click stop zero of this implementation would be, once you get it, you treat it as okay, we are synced, right? We are not gonna get anything else from this collection anymore, right? But we don't drop the connection, we don't treat this as a major failure case. We're just gonna start up, right? Because you will never get any data from that collection from this server, right? Now, click stop one. The next step is we can modify that logic to inject additional behavior that doesn't exist today, which would be like if the collection doesn't exist, do this, right? Exit, right? Do not signal as warm up is one thing that we can add on top of the click stop zero logic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So as a step one, we would remove the logic. We would just mark if we got a unsupported collection response from our configuration source, we would just mark it as synced and be done with it. That's
so
good.
There are two things that I think needs to be called out. One of them is I need to go and double check if this is possible in this streaming case. It should be, right? So we may need to change the protocol for this. But it should be possible to add this one to the protocol. The second thing is on the CRD side, there's also an additional concern, which I don't think you guys are interested in, but I'm just going to call it out nevertheless. So we have cases where on a Kubernetes cluster, people just not put their CRDs because they don't want it for some reason, right? So in that case, the galley behavior also needs to change where, it knows about the collection. Like, let's say, we deleted for whatever reason, the gateway resource, right? So then when Pilot asks for a gateway, even though the CRD doesn't exist, Galley should still say, okay, here's a gateway collection and it just has empty stuff. Because over time, the CRD can be introduced and then the gateway resource can appear at some point. But that's essentially a Galley problem more than a Pilot or MCP problem. So.
Okay. The part that would need to be added to MCP is like having the MCP server return unsupported collection on.
Yes, so this would be adding unsupported collection support to MCP, changing the behavior so that we don't drop the connection when the collection is not found. And on Pilot side, treat that as, okay, this is fully synced, right? So, which would be separate from the discovery discussion, which I think MCP should still have at the limit. I think that's still a good idea. It's just that I don't think it is needed to solve this particular problem.
That's fair. Yeah. Okay. This seems like a potential start for a solution. we're interested in PRing this. Do you
Okay.
think we could start working on it?
I would first create a proposal out of this so that
Cool.
people are I mean, this is essentially me kind of proposing this idea at this point, right? So I think if you can start a proposal and like get everybody on board with this, I'd rather do that and avoid having that conversation in a PR where things are implemented and might change in a major way, right?
That sounds good.
Okay. Are you guys willing to create that proposal?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
Okay. Sounds
Is
good.
it all right if we propose it alongside our initial proposal, which is configuring sources? Because we've only really heard that from you, and if we're bringing it to the community at large, I think like presenting all of our options makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we can capture different options in the proposal. I think that's fair.
Cool.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I don't think we have anything else on the agenda. You're good?
Cool. Yep.
Okay. All right, folks.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Is Martin